everybody, welcome tonight. I'm pretty excited for you all to be here. Thank you for coming out. My name is Emily Bassford. I'm a third-year economics major with minors in French and business. And after taking Dr. Juice's class the spring before last spring, an introduction to social entrepreneurship, I was very inspired by everything I learned, and I wanted to share that with others. So I joined the Change the World UF organization, and what we do is help bring social entrepreneurship to UF students and try to connect them with the ideas and practices of social entrepreneurship. And as well, last week we hosted I helped host the Eco Innovation Challenge with the Green Gator Footprints. And with that, we had 16 teams participate in the Eco Innovation Challenge. Our first place winner was Meg and Michelle of Sign Up. They were able to win $500 and the opportunity to be incubated in Gator Nest to help bring their idea more to life. Our second and third place winners were Full Circle and Urban Tree. And the videos of all the 6 finalists are up on our website at www.changetheworlduf.com/Eco Innovation Challenge if you'd like to see what their ideas were. Before we introduce our speaker, I'd like to ask you a few things for your help. Number one, please make sure that you signed in the back. Put your name and email clearly. And we will use this information to send you some future information and a link to an online survey where you can help give back your feedback after tonight's talk. Secondly, please make sure you help yourself to a book. I'm sure it'll be a really great read for everybody. The Work on Purpose book. Thirdly, this talk is being simulcasted in the Huff lobby, so please make sure to silence your cell phones and any noise-making devices. And fourthly, at the end of the talk, we will have time for questions and answers and a discussion with Ms. Galinsky. So if you'd like to continue the discussion, please join Change the World UF this Thursday, April 12th at 2 p.m. in the CEI, which is 267 in Stuzen Hall. We will be having our monthly brown bag and brainstorm to chat about your ideas of social entrepreneurship or to continue your ideas and feedback from tonight's talk. You can join us with Becca Bakes Cupcakes and Uncle Matt's Lemonade. And if you have any more questions, you can visit us on Facebook or online at www.changetheworlduf.org. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kristen Juice. She's the coordinator of UF's Innovation, Sustainability, and Social Impact Initiative, who will introduce tonight's speaker. Thanks so much.
It's great to see so many people here. When you plan an event like this, you never know how many people are going to show up. Tonight's events are the culmination of Campus Earth Day, and we've been celebrating that this whole spring semester. And that included things like the Green Gator Footprints Project and the Grimes Lecture Series. I have the honor of recognizing the many people who helped make tonight's event happen. We had a number of co-sponsors, and so I'd like to recognize each of them. First, the Office of Sustainability, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, both Sustainability Studies and the Department of Sociology, the University of Florida Catalyst Fund, the Center for Leadership and Service, the Masters of Arts in International Business Program, the International Business Society, the National Association for Black Accountants UF chapter, as well as Emily mentioned, UF's Innovative Sustainability and Social Impact Initiative and the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, where we educate, inspire, and empower students about opportunities in social entrepreneurship. And more information about that, if you're interested, because I know some of you have and have not taken the class, check out cei.ufl.edu and look for Innovative Sustainability and Social Impact Initiative. So I want to thank all of those centers and programs and offices for making it possible for us to fly Laura in and to provide copies of her book to every single one of you who are here this evening. I also want to recognize the students who worked really hard to make things happen tonight, and that would be Stefan, Katie, Greer, and Emily, so I wanted to make sure to thank you all for your hard work. And also I wanted to thank the staff of Echoing Green who helped to plan and coordinate Laura's visit from afar, and that would be Linda, who wasn't able to join us tonight, and also Rebecca as well, and they'll be getting a copy of this video, so they'll get to see the thank you. And then lastly, I want to thank each of you for choosing to spend your valuable and precious time here with us tonight, and for your interest in wanting to create a career with impact. Your aspirations to change the world inspire us to do the work that we continue to do. So thank you so much for coming tonight. And then lastly, I have the pleasure and privilege of introducing our guest, Laura Galinsky. Laura is a Senior Vice President of Echoing Green, which is a foundation that's best known for having awarded fellowships to over 500 emerging social entrepreneurs in over 40 countries, with more than $30 million of seed funding over the past 25 years. Specifically, they select 20 fellows each year. Before coming to Echoing Green, Laura was the Director of National Programs at DoSomething.org, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. Laura is the author of Echoing Green's book, a book previous to this called Be Bold, and then also this book, which is called Work on Purpose, and she's going to be talking to us tonight about creating a career with impact. And they are launching a parallel program on their website with the same title, Work on Purpose, that helps your generation build lives and careers that are both right for you and good for the world. So she's going to be sharing with us about how to do that. We're really glad to have her here. So please join me in welcoming Laura.
Hi everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. At any point you can't hear me, just raise your hand, let me know, because I'm sort of losing my voice. And I'll sneak back here every so often, but I think it's, I actually think I want to come in front, because I think it might be more comfortable, because I want to make this as interactive as possible. So thank you again for coming out today. It's so good to see so many faces, and to see it just really inspires me, because the topic of this conversation is around creating a career with impact, and to see so many people are interested in that topic is, well, just a big boost for me personally. Thank you, Kristen, so very much for partnering with Echoing Green, for inviting us to come back here. We did a program a few months back, and just being back here and actually being physically here is so nice. It's great to see this beautiful campus and to meet so many incredible students. I want to acknowledge my colleague Rebecca Kaufman, who helped with this event and is helping to run the Work on Purpose program at Echoing Green. I also want to acknowledge my friend Max Osei, who is a UF graduate who happened to be in Florida, although lives in New York, and I came out to support as well. So I want to start by asking you guys a question. And while this is a talk, there's going to be some interactive components, so get ready for that. You guys are going to, I'm going to create a space for you guys to reflect. That's kind of one of the hallmarks, the core of this very topic. So my question to you guys is, at the end of the day, what matters? At the end of the day, when you think about what's incredibly important to you, to the world, at the highest possible level, what qualities, competencies, emotions, events, places, people, what matters? That's a t-shirt, and some of you are actually going to walk away with this very t-shirt at the end, so that's just a preview. But let's get some interaction here. Just call it out. What matters? Love. Love? I heard love from lots of sides. That's family. What else? Happiness. I'm hearing the same thing. Wow, you guys are all in sync. Relationship to God. Fulfillment. Opportunity. Intention. Great. Empowerment. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so this is a good question to think about. At the end of the day, what matters? And so I challenge myself to answer that question myself. And I challenge myself to go way back and think of memories that help surface what I believe really matters at the end of the day. And I want to share with you 3 memories that came to mind. So the first, again, goes way back, because I do think that when you go deep into your childhood, you can surface some really interesting stuff. So I'm going to talk about when I was 6 years old. I grew up in New York City, and I commuted to my school in West Harlem with my mom every day. And I remember passing this man every single day on a bench right in front of my school. He was pretty dirty, had a long beard, stringy hair, and misshapen hat. He had a big cart with cans and bags and garbage, and in retrospect, I think he had kind of a vacant look in his eyes. And I remember being scared and holding my mom's hand tightly as I walked by. And because I saw him every day, no matter the weather, we started talking about him. And that's when I came to understand that he was homeless. Now, for my 6-year-old self, the idea that someone didn't have a home was mind-boggling, was confusing to me. And it was a really interesting kind of process. And I'm curious if you guys can think back to those first moments in your life when you realized that life was unfair, that there's great inequities in this world, that there's social injustice kind of in our backyard. And that was one of those moments for me. So when I think back to what matters, the first thing that comes to my mind is that home matters. And the second memory that comes to mind when I think about what matters, fast forward a few years, and I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I had the opportunity to travel again with my mom to Côte d'Ivoire, West Africa, because my mom was finishing a book with a woman whose husband had just been who received a job, had a job there and was working there, and so they had to finish their book. So for about a month, 6 weeks, I was in Côte d'Ivoire with her, and the kind of deal of missing so much school was that not only did I have to keep up on my studies, but I had to keep a detailed journal of my experiences. I'm so thankful for that, because not only do I have that journal now, but also it was a way for me to capture what was stirring inside. Now, I had seen a lot of suffering in my young years. I talked about seeing this homeless man. Actually, I came to realize much later that across the street from my school was a transitional home. And so there were a lot of homeless people kind of in that area, and had witnessed a lot as a result of that and other experiences. But nothing really prepared me for what I saw when I traveled abroad at this young age. And in my journal, I remember documenting things like the sky opening up in the afternoon and the rains coming down, and the kind of I'd never seen rains like that before, or going to visit a cocoa factory in Abidjan and getting so excited that it was going to smell delicious like chocolate, but actually it didn't smell good at all. The factory, I remember being really struck by that, and going to a village, and there was a ceremony where this man dressed up in a black robe with a black mask with cowrie shells adorned around the center, and he was on 6-foot stilts, and he was spinning around and spinning around. And I remember writing about how is it possible that he didn't fall? He couldn't even see. But mostly at that young age, I wrote about the children I encountered. I remember meeting a young girl who was about half my size and her belly swollen with worms, and realizing that she was about the same age as me, that malnutrition had stunted her growth. I also thought about how I can still see the face of this young boy whose legs were ravaged by polio. There were thin poles, and he had ingeniously strapped flip-flops to his knees and to his hands, and he was sort of scooting down the village path. Like everybody else, people were calling out to him, saying hi to him, and he was just pushing forward. And I just remember seeing his sheer determination and being really blown away by that. And I remember that wherever I went, whether I was visiting a school or a community group or just in the neighborhood where I was staying, that children would invite me to play. And we would play soccer. And at first I was really timid, shy. But over time I just, like everyone else, just started to play. And we played with a wheel and a stick. And I kind of remember that vividly. And what struck me then in my journal and in my memory, and when I think about what matters, is that ultimately there are things that connect us, right? That's a kind of a universal principle that we come to realize, especially those of us who are interested in kind of reducing the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. But can you think back again to those early moments where you actually recognize that and realize that? And for me, I think that might have been one of my early moments when I realized that across the world, here I was playing, and that at the end of the day, again, that every child loves to play. So for me, when I think about what matters, I think joy matters. So my third memory is more recent, and it came back to me when I thought about my first memory, a homeless man. And this is just in the last few years. I live in, anyone here from New York? Just curious. A few of you, okay, great. So I live in Upper Manhattan now, and Max, you might appreciate this, there's a man who lives in my neighborhood, a homeless man, who is well known. He's sort of employed by the supers to take out garbage, and people just sort of protect this man, and he protects the neighborhood, and he's just kind of a well-known guy. And I would sort of saw him over the years, would say hi and bye, but just kind of moved on. But one day I stopped and I started talking to him. His name is Eli, and 3 hours passed. It was a warm Thursday night, I remember that, and I couldn't believe how late it was. And I found out his story. And I found out that Eli was originally from the South and moved to Long Island, and that he had aspirations to be a doctor. And that he had a wife and he had 4 children, and one of his children he thinks is a doctor. But he fell on hard times, had sort of got addicted to alcohol and possibly drugs, I think drugs, although he didn't say that, and he chose to live on the streets. And he's been living on the streets for about 20 years. And I remember asking Eli, I said, Eli, are you happy? And he very quickly answered me, and he said, yeah, no one tells me what to do. I can wake up whenever I want to wake up. I can drink however much I want to drink. And yeah, I'm happy, Laura. And then I also remember he retreated in. And he paused, and he said, but sometimes no, because I don't have anyone, not even my children. It was that moment, and we all have moments like this. Every single one of us in this room has moments like that where we realize what we want to give and get out of this world, how we want to walk through this earth. And that was one of those moments that struck me. And so for me, when I think about what matters, I think about connecting matters. And we're going to talk about these very moments, and I'm going to challenge you to think about your own moments in your life. So I call these moments moments of obligation. Now what's interesting is that obligation is not to the world at large only, although that's a very key component of it. It's actually, the obligation is to yourself. Because what's revealed in these moments are things that you're connected to, things that you think are important, things that matter to you. And that if you heed the call of these moments, that you can discover something that's meaningful. And that's why they're moments of obligation. So those 3 memories that I shared with you are 3 of my many, many moments of obligation that I've had in my life, where I decided to lean in to the problems of the world and decided to be part of the population, like I am sure everyone in this room, to be part of the solution, to drive social change, to work on behalf of the homeless man that I never met but walked by when I was 6 years old, or the children in Abidjan, or the Elis of the world, to bring about more joy and connecting and homes to this earth. Now, what happens in these moments of obligation, which I think is particularly powerful, is that if you heed their call, and again, you interpret them and you figure out how they can show up in the decisions you make and what kind of actions you take on this earth, is that they can lead you toward your purpose. And when I talk about purpose, I actually define it as the biggest possible definition. What Dr. Damon from Stanford, who's an adolescent expert and also purpose expert, calls noble purpose. And that is purpose that is not only that shines back to yourself, right, and you only, but also a purpose that is forward-facing, that where, again, you are thinking about what you give and what you get and give to this world. This is a picture of someone that my organization funded named Kennedy Odede, who I hope you guys look up on the Echoing Green website, because his story is really powerful. He's in Kibera in Kenya. And the thing about identifying your purpose is that it is among the absolute hardest yet most important work you will ever do. That's what I believe. Now, why is it important? Why is identifying your purpose important? I think the answer is somewhat obvious, but I'll repeat some ideas that I have, but would be curious for others to contribute. It can help organize your life. It can help you push past the frenetic pace of living on this earth and make decisions and go toward goals. It helps give you meaning. It helps you connect. It helps you think larger than yourself. It helps you feel good. It helps you rise above the superficial. And I think those are some of the very, very important components of having a sense of purpose. And by the way, your purpose can change and shift and evolve as you change, shift, or evolve, as you have more moments of obligation and get clearer about what you want, or if that clarity actually shifts with you. But the thing that's really interesting about purpose and the work on purpose, or the research on purpose, that it actually has been proven to make people happier and healthier. So there's a study that, and I think it's about an 18-year-old study that reviews or surveys people who work on behalf of other people who believe that that's their purpose. And they are reported to have more job satisfaction and more job satisfaction and healthier lifestyles than those who don't, from in other professions, excuse me. And also that the work of Martin Seligson out of University of Pennsylvania, who's sort of the father of positive psychology, has also shown that kind of purpose-driven work makes for healthier people, healthier lives as well. So it's something that can kind of contribute and have an echo effect in your life and on multiple fronts. But it's also incredibly hard work. And what's interesting about why it's hard, it's not surprising to me that 1 out of 2 Americans report that they're not satisfied in their jobs as a result of this because it's hard work, or that there was a study, a longitudinal study that followed 7,000 8th graders through college, and they reported, the researchers found out that the grand majority of the young people had no sense of their purpose. Even if they were motivated individuals, they couldn't really answer the question of what they felt like was their greater purpose. And that really helped, that really contributed to kind of floundering and getting lost in systems, right? In our educational system and other systems and beyond, and being susceptible to outside influences detracting them. But the main reason why I think that it's really hard to kind of identify one's purpose is, simply put, purpose is not baked into the crucial conversations of our lives. We just don't talk about it. I'm curious, show of hands, how many people in your educational career thus far have had conversations with professors or other mentors about your ultimate purpose? A few of you. So I think that I think that's really refreshing. Because most rooms and most research demonstrate that that's actually not the case. Wouldn't it be interesting that instead of the question you hear over and over again as a young person, what do you want to be when you grow up, is if people start asking you, what do you think your purpose is? And that's not to add this sort of grandiose pressure, but it's more to get your mind thinking about that you have this one life to live, and what is it that you want to choose to do with that life, and how can you contribute as a result of you being here? And I think that that's, again, this important yet incredibly hard work. So here's the trick, and I said this before, but I'm going to emphasize it again. The moments of obligation that you have in your life can lead you toward your purpose. The moments of obligation can lead you toward your purpose. The best way to describe it is like, moments of obligation are to purpose as a thermometer is to a fever, that it becomes an indicator, a cue, a clue that demonstrates something's going on in your life. That most people, though, feel inspired or connected and they just let it pass it by, right? They pass by an Eli in the street and they never let it come into them and become something that they can reflect and interpret. But when you are feeling something and it actually is like this fever that cues you that maybe you're experiencing a moment of obligation and you should pay attention to it and think about how those experiences will contribute to what kind of life you want to lead. Does that make sense? Right, okay. So now for me, I could have passed by a lot of my moments of obligation, but I happen to work on behalf of an organization, as Kristen was mentioning, called Echoing Green, that literally funds people's moments of obligation. So let me break that down. Our mission is to unleash next generation talent to solve the world's biggest problems. And what we do is we identify people who have big, bold ideas to solve the world's biggest problems, as I was saying earlier, like inequities in health and education and human rights abuses and violence and the criminalization of youth, you name housing, homelessness, you name the issue in the world. We will accept applications for people who think that they have an innovative, groundbreaking idea to solve one of these problems, and kind of the best of the best through kind of this really big competitive business plan competition. We'll fund about 20 of them to go through an intensive process to launch their organizations, and we provide them with seed funding, support, technical assistance, wraparound services, kind of the hand to push them, to cheer them on, a shoulder for them to cry on as they're going through this whole intensive process of launching these social change organizations around the world. We have helped launch, as Kristen was saying, about 500 of them in 42 countries. This year we received over 3,500 applications for just 20 spots from 128 countries around the world. And here are some of the organizations we funded in the past. So I was talking earlier to a group of students. Our most well-known venture 20 years ago was Teach for America. I'm sure many of you have heard of Teach for America. We launched Teach for America when it was just an idea. And Wendy Kopp, who is the founder of Teach for America, who still runs it, had one business suit and her senior thesis in hand, and that was about it. And now it's a $250 million organization. And I was saying earlier, one of the largest recruiters of college students on campuses into this program than any other corporate program, which is really interesting, fascinating. City Year, I was walking around campus earlier and I saw signs for City Year Orlando. City Year was also launched through Echo and Green seed funding and support when Alan Casey and Michael Brown were graduating from Harvard Law School and had this idea of creating a domestic Peace Corps. And we supported the launch of City Year, which now has 21 offices, including City Year Orlando, and in South Africa and London, and more popping up around the world. And it's so interesting. It's the model for AmeriCorps. Many of you are familiar with AmeriCorps. Yeah, I see some heads. So AmeriCorps, President Bill Clinton visited City Year in Boston, its original office, one time, and he got the idea of kind of taking that model and scaling it, and lo and behold, became AmeriCorps. So that's an interesting scale proposition, not through the scaling of the organization, but scaling the idea through government, which is pretty interesting. Some of the other ones, so Embrace is interesting. This is a relatively new one, and this one is relevant in many ways to you guys because the idea of Embrace came out of a classroom. It was a design classroom, sort of a Fab Lab-esque class at Stanford, where students from all different schools were coming together, and they were challenged to create a base of a pyramid product. And business school student Jane Chen and Rahul Panikkar, a PhD engineer, created a baby incubator at 1% the cost of a traditional incubator. So most baby incubators are $20,000, which is prohibitively expensive for pretty much 98% of the world. As a result of that, babies die because you can't regulate their temperature if they're born in a health clinic or in the home. And so they designed a very, very simple product that works. It's basically this phase-changing material. You don't need electricity, you just need hot water, fire to be able to heat it up, and it's like a sleeping bag. They went through extremely rigorous testing over the last few years, and this last year there was the first time they were able to kind of get it a little bit into the market, before they kind of go mainstream, and they were able to save already 300 babies' lives as a result of this very simple $20 baby sleeping bag incubator. Mobius Motors visited this in Kenya a month and a half back, is a car company, a new car company made in Africa for Africans for the African terrain where every car is imported. So that's kind of a big new idea. And there's Freelancers Union is a union of freelancers. There's about a growing number of our workforce around the world is our contingent workers, part-time workers, and freelancers, but yet it's prohibitively expensive to get insurance, to have kind of a social safety net. So this woman, Sarah Horowitz, who won a MacArthur Genius Award for this idea, decided to launch an organization called that and create this new concept of portable unionism, which is creating a union around this kind of contingent workforce. And that's exactly what she has done. And it's the 9th, she launched it in New York. It's the seventh largest union in New York, and she just received a $250 million grant to scale this idea in about 6 other states. So it's pretty interesting there. And then literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other organizations we helped seed. And that's what Echoing Green does. And all those organizations were launched from a moment of obligation. That every single person, Alan Casey and Michael Brown and Wendy Kopp and Joel Jackson from Mobius Motors and Jane Chen from Embrace and Sarah Horowitz from Freelancers Union and Katie Ornstein from the Op-Ed Project and the guys from Sanergy launched this organization because they had a moment of obligation, and instead of turning away, they again leaned into it. Now I want to tell you about, in depth, about 2 moments of obligation and share with you in the hopes that some of them might inspire you. Excuse me one second. It might inspire you to think about your own moments of obligation. These are 2 stories, again, of founding organizations, and I'm not suggesting that everyone in here should found organizations, but they do demonstrate kind of the different ways moments of obligation can be realized in one's life. So I want you to meet a person, Andrew Yoon, who's in the book, so you can read his story in more depth, but I'll tell you about it briefly. So Andrew Yoon grew up in the Midwest, and he had 2 very competing messages growing up. And they, as he kind of tried to think about his purpose, they were at odds with one another. The first message was make a lot of money, be successful, and being successful means, again, making a lot of money, but also meant being a PhD mathematician or working in finance or consulting. And then the second message he heard from his family was that to help those who are suffering in this world. And he watched his mother write half of her student stipend. She was getting her PhD and write half of her student stipend and live very, very frugally so that the relatives in Korea could have a better life and that money could go further in his family, with his family in Korea. And so as he grew up, he kind of tried to figure out how to calibrate these 2 competing messages that he received from his childhood. And ultimately, the making a lot of money and the prestige factor of kind of investment banking and consulting won. And it was partly because he went to Yale, was an economics major, and was kind of snapped up by a consulting firm, recruited on campus before he could kind of pause and think about it for too long. And so that's what he did. He started working for a top consulting firm, and he had upward mobility and a strong, good salary, and he was getting more and more responsibility, but he felt empty. His consulting firm was very progressive and gave him a lot of time to be able to volunteer, not a lot of time, 2 hours a week during the workday to volunteer. And that was what he lived for, those 2 hours where he could play around with kids. He worked at a shelter and run around and just see the smiles on kids' faces, and that's what really fed him and his soul. But unfortunately, his life was completely out of whack because he spent most of his time at this consulting firm and then just 2 hours, so it just felt something wasn't right. But he wasn't bold enough at the time because everyone was giving him so many accolades and giving him so much reward for having secured this really great job that he couldn't just quit and kind of figure out what he wanted to do on behalf of social change. So he went to business school to kind of be able to identify that. And when he was in business schools, he went on a service trip, as many people do, and he found himself in Bungoma, Kenya, which is in western Kenya, 8 hours from Nairobi, a farming community, very, very rural, also a place I visited about a month and a half ago. And it's really feels like you're far away. And he just wanted to, he was on the service trip, really, he felt like he had lived a bit of a sheltered life and he didn't really understand the world around him, and he wanted to have more of a perspective. And so that's why he went on the service trip, and he was just trying to learn and learn as much as possible. And he found himself through a business school contact in Bungoma and in a home of a widow named Christine. And he tells a story about how Christine was preparing the meal for her family that went while he was inside her one-room home, and she was taking sort of like a rice, a flour, and putting some water in it and kind of mixing it up, and her kids were kind of gathered around her waiting for their meal, and she was going off and feeding them, and she didn't have enough for herself. And Andrew watched one little boy sort of in kind of 2 sips kind of finish the one meal he had of the day. And for Andrew, that was his moment of obligation, because he couldn't, after experiencing that and seeing that, he really just couldn't do, the idea of working on behalf of companies to make them kind of more efficient and effective, although a very noble and important work, was not something that he personally was compelled to do anymore after witnessing that. It was too powerful. He, in telling me the story a few years ago, he still teared up telling me the story. He still became emotional because it was that deep of a moment for him. And he realized that there was a season in Kenya, in this farming community where people were producing food, called the hunger season. And it was just accepted that you had lots of good weather and you had flourishing crops, and then there was not such good conditions, and then you didn't have enough food. And people just endured that. And he just felt like he couldn't, that was not okay. So he was a man in search of a solution, and he identified a few ideas. His ideas were that and he really used his kind of consulting and business school practices to kind of come up with this idea. So there was a lot of utility in his early education to bring all the pieces together. And what he discovered was that if you could bundle services, if you could bring not only the seed education and farming education, the right seeds, and bringing people and access to microfinance and tools and other kind of necessities to be a good farmer. Most people had land. They had 1 acre or more. But if you could bundle these services and get people to work together, you could actually make a really big difference. And that's exactly what he did. And the ingenious kind of business school mind that he came up with was that if you could sell, when the crops were plentiful, if you could sell the excess and market and at volume with all these farmers coming together, and then give the proceeds back to the farmers, and then create savings programs for these farmers, that they would have enough money to last them when times were tough. And he started with 38 farmers. He talks about how he didn't even graduate, he didn't even go to his business school graduation, because he was so excited to kind of pick up and move his entire life from Chicago to Bungoma, Kenya, and start this program. He started with 38 farmers. Echo and Green provided him with seed funding and support. And within 3 years, he had reached 15,000 farmers. And when I was there a month and a half ago, he reached his 100,000 farmer mark. 100,000 farmers who are not hungry because of this program that works beyond the stopgap food aid that they were used to. And that's sort of the power and the potential of acting on behalf of your moments of obligation. And what's interesting is that if you look at Andrew's job, in many ways, although he's in a leadership position, he's doing very similar things. He is thinking about operations management and strategic planning and sort of financial modeling, and that's sort of what he did when he was in business school. That's definitely what he did when he was consulting, but he's doing it on behalf of a population that makes a big difference for him. And so that is again, his moment of obligation and what he was able to bring about as a result of that. This is Andrew answering the question, as we ask all of our fellows to do, why do you do what you do? And he writes, because my friends are going hungry. I want to tell you one other story. This is not in the Work on Purpose book, but this is another friend of mine who Echo and Green supported, a guy named David Lewis. Unfortunately, David is no longer with us on Earth, but his work moves on, and it lives on, in many of other people who he has helped over the years. So David Lewis, his story is, in many ways, it was like Eli's. He fell on really hard times. He grew up, he had was given a hard hand at life, and became addicted to heroin at a very young age. And sort of to feed his habit, he was kind of engaged in a lot of illegal activity. And eventually that caught up with him, and he was sentenced to 20 years to life for holding up convenience stores. and he was 19 years old, and he was sentenced to San Quentin Prison. I'm not sure if folks are familiar, but it's a notorious prison in the Bay Area, not a place that anyone would really want to walk into. And he quickly learned that he couldn't play kid games there, that he would be killed. He was among the youngest there. And after a few years, he was relayed to me that he was sort of running everything illegal within San Quentin's walls. And he was just kind of, that was his life, right? Just lots of illegal activity, lots of hurting and pain, and sort of, as he said, sort of a cancer to society. All that stopped when he experienced his first moment of obligation. His first moment of obligation was during the earthquake in San Francisco, when no one knew what was going on, but the walls were shaking. There was complete, utter chaos. Even the guards who had the whole thing down, right, on lockdown, there was a lot of chaos because they didn't know what was happening. There was an old building. There was some destruction. And David talks about how he fell to his knees because he realized that he could die in prison having never contributed to society, just taken. And he had never been a father to his two sons who he had fathered before he went to prison when he was 19. And that to him was an overwhelming feeling, and he became committed through his moment of obligation to change, first to himself and to be a role model to his sons and also to others in his community. So, but like so many people who leave prison without a job, without marketable skills, and with lots and lots of old bad patterns and habits, he was rearrested within a short period of time, and because of his conviction and his moment of obligation, he pleaded with the judge to not send him back to prison, and she listened, and he was sentenced to a rehabilitation center, 1-year rehabilitation center, and within that center, he created a program called Circle of Recovery, and it was a men's group of people like him who had very similar lives, who supported each other in the recovery process. And they worked intensively with each other for over a year, and they all lifted each other. They were all able to hold each other accountable, to really know what it felt like, to have deep, deep, deep empathy, and they all were able to thrive as a result of that. It wasn't easy, it wasn't perfect, they had dips and peaks and valleys, but ultimately they were all able to become healthy and contributing members of society as a result of that. Inspired by that, he decided to start an organization based on this model. Now at the time, recovery programs, it was kind of a clinical approach, right? So you go out of the community, you're treated by doctors, and his kind of bold idea was that he wanted to have former addicts who were recovered be the people who supported community members, and instead of taking them out of community, that they would be in the community. So it was kind of in the community, for the community, by the community, sort of, that was his model for his new organization. He started it also with an unlikely partner, an undergraduate student from Stanford University, this woman named Priya Haji. So the two of them started an organization called Free at Last. And Free at Last became a model in the community. At the time, East Palo Alto, where they were located, was the murder capital of the United States. And a lot of that he knew had to do with drugs. So he went, and the different founders of Free at Last went block by block by block to launch this organization and be able to kind of reduce the crime as a result of that. In fact, in their first year, they were able to reduce the crime by 87%. So you could say that he had two moments of obligation. He had the first one when he launched the organization, and when he decided to change his own life. And the second one was to launch his organization. And I know now that his moments of obligation are lived in other people's moments of obligation who he's helped. In fact, he told me this story about how he used to go on the anniversary of the earthquake back to the same cell he was in during his moment of obligation, and whatever person or people were in that cell, he would tell him his story. And his idea in doing that was just to pass it on, pass it on, pass it on. And so those are two examples of moments of obligation, and you can kind of see through those moments of obligation that there are many different ways that they can come into being. So it could be through being in an environment that's new, like when I was in Cote d'Ivoire, or it can be through a deep educational experience, or learning about life, or through great joy and potential, through experiencing hardship firsthand, or through seeing or witnessing, bearing witness to other people's hardship, as you can see in some of these stories. So that's sort of the spark of some of the moments of obligation that we have seen in our fellows and in each people that I have spoken to. And they also don't need to be as dramatic. When I was kind of sharing this talk with my mother, again, I was trying to reiterate some of the facts of my early moments of obligation with her, just to make sure I wasn't kind of revisionist history. She talked to me about her moment of obligation was that when she was 10 years old, and she had very suddenly lost her father, very, very suddenly, and unexpectedly, she felt, as a result of that, she felt sorry for herself for 2 days, and she has this very distinct memory of lying on her bed and saying, that's it, I don't want to feel sorry for myself anymore, I'm going to make my life matter. And that was her moment of obligation. She told me this just literally 2 days ago, and she's never shared that with me, but it's really interesting what surfaces when you start thinking about this very conversation. So with that in mind, we only have a few minutes left. Would love for some people to kind of spend a minute or two thinking about your own moments of obligation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to trigger you by asking you some questions. And then just in closing, would love some people to share in front of the group, and as a result of that, get a t-shirt here. So if you think about it, think about when your heart has been heavy, and when and why it's been heavy. Or when you have seen or experienced injustice. When, how does it happen, and how did it make you feel? Think about, have you ever been outside your comfort zone? What happened? What did you learn as a result of that? Or perhaps you've encountered an insightful teacher, coach, mentor who opened your eyes up to a new issue and made you care about that issue in the way they do. How'd they do that, and how did seeing that issue change you? Or have you taken a trip that changed the way you looked at something? How did it make you feel? Or have you known an individual or group that your peers considered the other? How did knowing that individual or group change you? Have you felt that way yourself? What happened? What did you learn? So think about some of those. And in closing, would love to hear a few people just in sort of really quick episode of 1-minute stories share your own moments of obligation. Yes. Yes. Why don't you stand and come up? Thank you for being brave.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica. I'm a criminology major. I have no idea who else in this room is a criminology major. When I was 4 years old, throughout when I was born till basically that age, a big thing in my household was reading comic books to me and my sisters. My dad loved them and collected many different kinds. And I love Spider-Man, just like I'm sure, hopefully, other people like Spider-Man. And when I was 4 years old, going to Judaic preschool at my temple, a kid came up to me and said that my dad should not be living in our city. He's in danger to our town, blah, blah, blah. And I had no idea what he's talking about. And we got in a fight, and I ended up getting suspended under preschool standards from school. And I went home, was crying, and they're like, why would you do this, blah, blah, blah. And I said the reasons, because a kid in our school said that you don't belong here at school. And so my dad started crying, and later that day, we had, later that day, I found out that,
That's okay.
that he was arrested. He and my mom had a chiropractic business, and a woman sued him for malpractice and sexual charges that he assaulted her. And it went on for a year and a half, and was basically given, my parents were very poor at the time, so they had like a public defender, and were not really able to do any trials or anything or prove innocence, and they lost a ton of money, and he was given the option of 5 years in prison or to be on the sex offending list. And so he was on the list, and he was actually about 10 years ago recently got off the list with appeals. And he told me the story that day. My sisters found out about 2 years ago because it was never an issue with them. And when I heard the story and just the legal process of what they had to go through just to prove innocence, it really hurt me. And from that day, I realized that I want to be my dad's superhero, and I want to be the superhero for like people who can't afford their own justice. Sorry. One of the, in about the 80s, one of the biggest, sorry if I'm taking too long, I'm just rambling. In the 80s, we had about 76 exonerations. What that means is through DNA and false confessions in our prisons, about 76 of the people who have been in prison, not jail. Prison is when you serve term for more than a year, were released because of false confessions that police, judges, lawyers made them do, or they couldn't afford, or whatever the reason, and were set free. And since that time, DNA is really one of the biggest reasons why people are put in jail. And so one of my goals in life is to kind of just be the person to really show that no one's really proven innocent or guilty until enough evidence is there, and don't judge someone because of who they are, what they've done, or what you don't. Until you know their story, you never really know who someone is, just like the man who's been in jail throughout most of his life. Like, you just don't know.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you. It's amazing. People's life circumstances, their stories are just such powerful catalysts to doing the work that they do, and it just gives so much more conviction. So we really appreciate you coming out and bravely talking about your own personal experiences. Who else wants to share a moment of obligation? Sure, come on up.
Should I introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah, please.
Hey everyone, my name is Nicola Rohr, and I'm a dietetics student in pre-med here at UF. I'm a sophomore. And essentially, my moment of obligation is not necessarily a moment. I'm really close with my family, and one of my family members, my cousin, has struggled with weight and like her entire life. And it kind of began in high school. I found out 2 years ago that she went through a horrible breakup, and she had a horrible relationship with her father, and it was really tough. And essentially because of that, she's now like over 500 pounds. And because of that, I've come up with an idea that essentially, like in high school, people, like overweight people, need to be supported and kind of given an environment in which they can learn how to be healthy. And that's my
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Again, the path from family and first-person experiences is coming out loud and clear here. We get one other, maybe two if we're quick. Yes.
So this actually kind of ties the two together. My name is Miguel, by the way. I'm a senior finance major with minors in sustainability and entrepreneurship. But when I was little, I'd say around 8, my brother actually went to prison for, he got first time offender, he got 7 years. He was in there for 5.5 years of good behavior, but that lesson taught me a lot. I mean, I only got to see him 3 times a year. It was Christmas, his birthday, and over the summer, from when I was about 8 to 16. And he, I don't know, people always used to give you funny looks because people always say, oh, they're in jail, you know, they're not a good person. And he met so many amazing people in there, and he really turned his life around, and it really changed him. So relating to that, you know, that taught me not to always judge people off the first impression you get, that everyone has a story kind of that relates back to yours. And then secondly, he actually learned 6 languages in prison, guitar, and started helping other inmates lose a lot of weight. And he recently just started his own gym, and it's been really successful. And he just helped one woman. He's making a documentary called Unsupersize Me, and he helped one woman lose 200 pounds in a year. And so that kind of relates to that. I just thought it was very interesting. But and he's taught me just a ton about helping others and you know, giving other people a second chance. And I think that I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do in life, but I know those are 2 kind of facets that I want to include in whatever I do.
Thank you. Wow, these are really incredibly powerful. What I want to do, just for literally just 5 minutes, just in the spirit of everyone having a chance, is we're going to have 10 minutes of questions, so please don't leave, a Q&A. But if you can turn to the person next to you and just for 1 minute each, literally, we're just going to do it for 5 minutes, so it has to be super, super sharp, is for you to just share what you think your moment of obligation or moments of obligations may be, just so you can have, if anything was sparked in this conversation, you have the forum to be able to at least articulate it. It's really powerful to think something, and then it's even more powerful to say it to someone, and even more powerful to share it in front of a big group like these 3 individuals did. So let's just spend a minute just for you guys just to have that, and then I'm going to gather us for us to have just a few minutes of Q&A. So turn to the person next to you and introduce yourself and start talking. I'm curious, was it good? Did anyone come up with, did people think of things that they hadn't thought of in a long time, just by show of hands? Did anyone, a few people? Was it easy to come up with a moment of obligation for folks, or difficult? Some say easy. Yeah? Difficult for some? Yeah? Okay. It's interesting. So I hope that in conclusion that you now have a language to recognize when you're compelled to move, to dedicate yourself, to make a commitment towards something that you're connected to because you're feeling it, you're experiencing it, and that you heed those moments. And in heeding those moments, they can become your North Star and can lead you toward a purpose, impact-driven, meaningful life that delivers the change that you want to see. And for me, in conclusion, moments of obligation are the answer to the question in one of my favorite Mary Oliver poems, the last line where she asks, "Tell me, what do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" So thank you very much for being here today. I would be really happy to answer. We have about 5 minutes to answer any questions or any comments that you guys have about this or any other topic related to echoing green and social entrepreneurship, moments of obligation, purpose, anything that you can come up with. But first of all, thank you for being here and for thinking through these topics. Any questions? Yes?
Just curious, with the marketing of the hand, why did you choose
Where does that come from?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a great question. So there's this public media arts artist I met named Tony Deifel, who created this campaign called Why Do You Do What You Do? And he basically came up with this question, and I'm really big into asking and answering big questions because I feel like they can, again, reveal a lot. So when I first heard about this, it immediately resonated with me, where he just around the world has asked people to answer the question, why do you do what you do, put it on a sign, take a picture, upload it on this website, and he has literally had millions of people answer that question. He himself, we asked all of our fellows, everyone we funded, to answer that question. And the hand was because I was actually partnering with him in the creation of my book. We decided to not just do a sign, but actually do a hand because it was different. So that's where it came from. And these are the answers to the questions of the 4 of the 5 people in the book. Marty Oak says, because everyone has aspirations. Mark Hannes, who works on behalf of preventing genocide, talk about a big topic, talks about, I refuse to be a bystander to genocide. Cheryl Dorsey says, who am I if not the good daughter? And, oh goodness, and Sochita Puv said, to make my parents' sacrifice worth it. Hopefully that will spark you guys to read what I think will be a very short, quick read in between all of the academic studies you're pursuing. Any other questions? Yes?
How do you kind of like decide like people's companies or ideas? How do you decide to put your money in it? Because obviously not all of them are $1 million companies. And also, like for example, the guy who came out of prison, who was a back-to-back offender. How do you decide that his idea and his obligation is good enough for you to?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, great question. So we invest in people who have great ideas, but at the end of the day, we're investing in people, and we're investing in their potential. And so we have a very rigorous process that is mostly art and a little bit of science, but mostly art. We have a 5-tier process, so people apply, but then they go through stage and stage and stage. That culminates in a finalist weekend. But we have over 400 people, experts from around the world on their very topic, participate in the selection process. So we're getting lots of good expert opinion on their business plans. But then we're also making sure, as seed funders, as angel investors, it's incredibly important to us as a social change organization that we're not just putting forward examples of people who have had all the privileges and opportunities. We want to ensure that we have a really, as much as possible, a diverse population of people, which means that we exist as one of the only seed funders of social change organizations that have an open process to be risk takers as much as possible. So you could say that investing in David Lewis's organization, a formerly incarcerated person who had never run an organization, let alone had much of a job, was a risk, and in fact it was, but it was a risk definitely worth taking because his organization is 17 years old, the idea has scaled all around the world. Now having said that, some of our risks don't pay off and they close. Or they're not able to deliver the change, the aspiration that the people originally intended. But again, we have a crowdsourced, intensive process, many stages, lots and lots of input, and then we exist to take risks. Question? Yes?
Yeah, do you actually provide seed funding for smaller ventures, maybe like a few, like up to $30,000, $40,000, or do you only fund bigger projects? And secondly, what's the process of going about if you do want to apply for the seed funding? What's the process?
Yeah, so it's a fellowship program, not a fund, which means that everyone gets the same amount of money. It's like a fully loaded $150,000 over 2 years that includes in-kind plus direct capital. And so it doesn't matter if you're doing work in Rwanda or New York City. That's what you get. And the idea is that even though the cost of living is much higher in New York, we can provide folks with more support locally. It's harder for us to travel to Rwanda. And so people have applied and received fellowships for organizations that are really, really, really early idea on paper up until 1-2 years of operation, but we're still the first significant institutional money. But again, it's a fellowship program for the individual. So it doesn't matter the size of the venture, but everyone gets the same amount. And we have an open application process. Anyone from anywhere over the age of 18 who has this big idea for an independent organization can apply in the app, and it opens up online every year in the fall. So It's on echoinggreen.org, and I can give you a card if you're interested in learning more about it, and anyone else who's interested as well. And I encourage you guys to apply if you have an idea. Yes?
In your experience, have you found that most of these social entrepreneurs have more of like these huge life-changing moments of obligation, or is it more a culmination of smaller events?
Both. So I shared, David's is obviously a really dramatic moment of obligation. He's an anomaly. And most are, and saying moments in some ways is also not necessarily fully it's not one moment in your life changes and the thunderbolt. It's really kind of a gathering of different experiences that are a series of moments that kind of add weight and gravity to something. So most of our fellows have kind of different experiences that kind of come together. And then for those who are founding organizations, every single fellow can trace their decision back to a moment. Because literally there was an idea of launching an organization and then not launching, and they've made a decision. And sometimes that decision wavered, but sometimes the moments are not dramatic. They're just kind of like, let's go for it, let's do it, kind of moments. But I think the main point I'm trying to make here is to pay attention to when you're pulled and compelled, because it's something sort of larger than yourself or something deep inside yourself saying that you're connected to something. And those, we're not trained to pay attention as a society. We don't have these conversations. So those are the moments that I think are really important indicators of something going on. So that's what my wish is for each and every one of you, whether they're dramatic moments or not. And they don't all have to be really hardship moments or suffering moments. There's moments of joy and of aspiration that compel people, potential that people see that they want to invest in. So it doesn't, most of them do come out of struggle and hardship. That is definitely the case. You're working on behalf of social change, but not all the moments come from struggle moments. Any other questions? One last question? Yes.
Do you have like one of your pictures, or do you know what yours would say if you had to write it on your hand?
In the book? Yeah, well, in the book I didn't write it on my hand, I don't think. I wrote, "Working on Purpose Propels Impact." But I've written, I've done 3 or 4 of them. "Everyone Loves Someone Deeply" is another one of mine. Another answer to the question, why do you do what you do? I think my first one was inspiration perpetuates inspiration. I can't remember. That's terrible. So many of them over the years. But check out Why You Do What You Do. It's the acronym, Why You Do What You Do. And it's a really interesting arts project online, and it's kind of fun to see what other people have written. And there's lots of famous people who've answered the question, and it's just a kind of a cool project. So thank you guys so very much for being here today. Really appreciate it.